Gwen is League's latest champion, and although almost every champion starts off with a pretty low win rate, it usually makes a turnaround once the player base gets more time with the champ and the community begins to shape a proper playstyle as to what role that champion is supposed to play. More often than not though, new releases of champions tend to end up being a little bit too strong in the end as an attempt to get players to try them out. With Gwen, however, we haven't quite felt that just yet. Although I've heard some mixed opinions on Gwen's capability as a champion, whether she's good or bad, I think she has some really weird designs that give her a generally strange feel. Let's talk about it. Quick reminder that only 4% of my audience is actually subbed, so if you could hit the button for me, that'd help a ton. By the way, let me know in the comments if you want a full guide on Gwen in the future. Onto the video. So why do I think that Gwen's so awkward as a champion? The answer kind of lies in her inherent design here. Looking at her champion identity, Riot's pitched her kind of as a sideline duelist champion, with some elements making her feel like the love child of Fiora and Xin Zhao. And lacking any sort of CC in her kit, you already know that Gwen's going to be razor focused on dishing out as much damage as possible. What makes her feel so weird though is her late game focused power curve, which I think immediately puts her in the pool of champions that can be pretty hard to balance. I'm not saying that this is a bad thing, but this can set up Gwen to be in a position where she's going to feel unhealthy for someone, no matter how strong or weak it is in the current metagame. Just by her current playstyle, I already get the impression that Gwen creates this really weird dynamic when she plays in either solo lane, which makes it feel really bad for either the Gwen player or the player she's facing against. We've already established that Gwen's more of a side laner than an excellent team fight champion and focuses primarily on being able to generate threat in a side lane. Normally, strong top laners in the current metagame either dominate the early game themselves with great upfront stats and then carry those leads by drawing pressure and playing with their team. Another type of great top laner in the game thrives in having low resources as a weak side lane, being able to either stabilize most laning phases or just work with very little economy and therefore not worry about getting stomped on in a bad matchup. Gwen, on the other hand, is neither of these things. Having both a weak early game, but also requiring a lot of resources to get her going, she's a very needy champion all things considered. Her kit is both low range and low damage in the early game, and it makes it really hard for her to walk up for CS and establish a lead because there's so many champions in the game that are able to just beat her up and make her suffer. Because of her lack of good top lane matchups, she's actually been seeing some play in the mid lane to compensate, and she's honestly not too bad, as her W makes her immune to all abilities outside of her 400 range zone. Gwen is cruising into matchups like control mages that succeed best when playing outside of that zone. Of course, in solo queue though, not every mid lane you're going to play against is going to be a control mage, so we have to keep that in mind. Similar to the likes of Fiora though, Gwen needs a fair amount of handholding in order to ensure a smoother transition into the later phases of the game. If that doesn't really pan out and Gwen gets dumpstered, she's likely going to be useless. Put it this way, if a side lane champion doesn't really win the early game and ends up losing in side lane, what's really the purpose of the champion? In spite of her really bad early game trough, if she makes it through or even gets a decent lead in the early game, Gwen feels absolutely fantastic. With the amount of innate sustain and her nature to just automatically win extended trades in the later stages, a fed Gwen is an excellent Gwen. All of her weaknesses become irrelevant because Gwen becomes this amazing drain tank skirmish champion that just becomes unstoppable in the right hands. This is the really awkward dynamic that Gwen is forced to play into, and I personally find it unhealthy no matter how it pans out. It's similar to champions like Kassadin or like Vayne in a solo lane where it's like really gravitated. It could be the issue of the current metagame not fitting her that well, or I could just have a terrible read on the champion honestly, or we could even see the champion adapt accordingly depending on what Riot does and how it adapts in the meta. But nonetheless, I think Gwen as a top or mid laner may have some issues. Gwen simply cannot fill the shoes of a good top or mid in the current metagame, and it's hard for her to find a good place. And this is when I thought about Gwen jungle. Compared to her laning counterparts, I actually think that putting Gwen in the jungle might not be too bad of an idea. Instead of making her struggle against champions with her weak laning phase, she can overcome her downsides a little bit by making better use of her kit in the jungle. 1000 cuts goes from having essentially no impact in the early game to becoming a decent jungle clearing tool as she's able to consistently proc it, and Gwen's high uptime attack speed steroid in her E allows her to have an honestly pretty decent clear speed. Unlike top lane where she was designed to be, Gwen's lack of CC can be made up for if she can clear fast, which is true. Many fast clearing junglers in the game right now, like Nidalee or Graves, have recently gotten away without having any CC in their kits, so Gwen's lack of it appears to honestly be a non-issue. The one issue she'll still have though is a weaker early game, but it's definitely not going to be as much of a problem if she focuses on having good clears and high tempo as most decent jungle champions do right now. Regardless of where she goes or how she plays, the design of Gwen's kit creates a really weird feast or famine dynamic, which although allows her to look really cool and stylish when she succeeds, there's a chance that she can provide nothing to a team in certain other games, which is why in my eyes, she can be both a great and terrible champion. Hope you enjoy Gwen nonetheless though, and I'm sure Riot will find a way to give her a healthy spot in the metagame. That's it from me though, and I will catch you in the next one. Stay fresh.